Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. We're going to give 1 or 2 minutes for everybody to log in, and it looks like our chat is disabled, so we're going to work on that. Thanks for letting me know that came through on the Q&A. So we'll get the chat enabled here in a few minutes, but we'll give everybody about another 90 seconds or so to log in, and we've got a lot to share with you today, so we'll get started soon. Thank you.
Did you get my chat? Looks like I can chat people maybe.
Well, I can see your chat, Tracy. I'm not sure if everybody...
Oh, here we go. Yep.
There we go. Yay, there we are. Hello, everyone.
Oh, it's so good to see everybody and see where you're from. Say hi.
Yeah, North Carolina, Texas.
Yay. Oh my gosh.
Illinois,
Illinois, and Texas. Oh my gosh.
Bowling Green, Salt Lake City. Oh, we got Anchorage. Okay, we've got coast to coast. Great. All right.
Oh,
and now we've got Canada too. So we've got Canada, Alaska, covering everybody here. So.
Yay.
All right. Good. Welcome all. My name is Stephanie Fritz. I am the mission coordinator of the Office of Christian Formation in the Presbyterian Mission Agency, part of the PCUSA, based out of Louisville, Kentucky. We are welcoming Presbyterians today. I'm sure we're welcoming Presbyterian Church of Canada today, but we're also welcoming folks from many, many different denominations and backgrounds, and that is wonderful. We're also know that we're welcoming educators, pastors, youth workers, parents, elders, deacons, volunteers, and just a really wide variety of people that care about faith at home practices. So that is the webinar that you've logged in today, At Home Faith Practices. We'll be talking specifically about Lent, and we will also be talking about practices for beyond Lent. So I'm sure that many of you have logged into this webinar to hear from author, mother, and PCUSA ordained pastor, Traci Smith. And we are happy to welcome her in just a moment. We'll hear from her about her new book, Faithful Families for Lent, Easter and Resurrection. A couple of housekeeping things here first. I hope that many of you that are Presbyterian received the link to the Google form that allowed you to purchase Traci's books in packs of 5 or 10 so that you may get them into the hands of your families. It's not too late. We still have some funding left. So for our PCUSA friends, in the chat will be going the link to that Google form. So we want to make sure that you know that you still have an opportunity to take advantage of that. In today's webinar, we're going to first hear from Traci, and she's going to present about practices in general. She's going to present about faith practices for Lent. We're going to pause for a Q&A when she's gotten through that portion of the presentation. So do put your questions in the Q&A function. That's the easiest for us to keep track of them. After that Q&A section, we're going to dive into practices, the 5 practices that the Office of Christian Formation has talked about for a few years now, and Traci did 5 videos on those, along with a 6th video for Holy Week. So we'll talk about those videos. You will finally get the link to those videos. They are intended to go to your families, and they may use them for Lent, but they may use them for any other time, the 5 practice videos too. So, and then we'll have another Q&A after that. So there is going to be some opportunity to ask your questions and, move forward. So I think we'll go ahead, and I'm going to welcome author Traci Smith, pastor, and mother of 3. Yes, Traci?
Yes, 3 little ones and a new dog. Just like a 4th baby.
Thank you so much for being with us, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see some familiar names in the chat, and to be with you today. It's such an honor and a joy to be with you to talk about Lent and Easter. Thank you to the Presbyterian Church Office of Christian Formation for this invitation, for the innovative idea that they had to offer books for you at a discount for your families. Spread the word. We want to make sure that we get them out to as many families as we can. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get through some things here. I'll talk for about a half hour. So here we are. Yay. So as Stephanie said, I'm a PCUSA author or minister, author, and mom. My favorite place to be is kind of where those things all overlap. My passion is faith practice at home. I know that families are really busy, and I love to try and help them to create sacred space at home through faith practice. So I've written a number of books on this topic. They're the Faithful Families series, and the one that we're talking about today is Faithful Families for Lent, Easter, and the Season of Resurrection. I want to just be clear that we're talking about faith practices for Lent, and the book is the guide, but you don't need to feel like you have to have the book in order to implement some of these ideas. We want you to be able to use it if it's useful to you, but I hope that you will feel like this webinar is useful to you for your Lenten planning, whether or not you choose to use the book. Today, Presbyterians, we love our agendas. Very briefly want to go over faith at home practice in general. This is probably well known to a lot of us, so it'll be a very brief introduction, but just in case we have people that don't use faith practices at home a lot, I want to talk about my particular spin on it. Then we're going to get to nitty gritty of ideas for Lent. I'm going to give you a Lenten intention and focus, and then 3 options for each of the potential focuses. Foci, I don't really even know. I want to give you a chapter overview. Again, if you're not using the book, you can think of it as your own kind of idea overview and flow for Lent. And then talk a little bit about what we've learned from doing this. We're into our second full Lenten season. We're not out of COVID. We're doing things in a hybrid way. Still, most of us are coming back in some way, but what have we learned? And, spoiler alert, it's to be simple, to break things down and to make them as simple as possible for our families. Then I want to talk briefly, I don't know how much time we'll have left, but I want to talk briefly about the theology of the cross and why it matters. And then book logistics and permissions, just some quick things about using the book if you choose to. And then, as Stephanie said, we'll head to Q&A. I know the Q&A is open, so you should feel free to drop your questions in so that they can be prepared for that. You can drop them into the Q&A box at any time. Probably better to do it that way than the chat, but you can drop them in the chat as well. I won't be monitoring the chat though, so put them in the Q&A. So this is in the first page of my first book, this quote, "Faith is learned when it's woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life." That's one of my mission statements. For my whole life, it's one of the things that I didn't know was going to be such a focus of my whole career when I wrote that sentence. The more that I do it, the more I believe in it. And it's the idea that we learn our faith through practice. And when we teach it to our children, we should teach it through practice, not teaching about the Bible, but teaching through practice as much as we can through repetition. In my first book, I talk about the 3 pillars of faith at home: tradition, ritual, and spiritual practice. Now I kind of talk about it more generally, just under the umbrella of spiritual practice, but traditions, easy to connect to, traditions during a holiday, during Easter, a ritual, a time to mark the moment, a time to do a ceremony, a special coming of age or something special like that. And a spiritual practice. Of course, these spiritual practices could be ancient, the labyrinth and Lectio Divina, and then maybe the Spirit is bringing us some newer ones like imagination and art or breath. So I was talking to Stephanie and Miata about this when we were planning, and we talked about the importance of having focus and of keeping things simple. And I really want to emphasize this, I can't emphasize it enough. And I feel like as a content creator of this stuff, I feel a special responsibility to remind you that you don't need to do everything. So for example, this book that we have, Faithful Families for Lent, Easter, and the Resurrection, I don't know how many ideas there are in there, 80 to 100 probably. You would probably be doing well to pick 3 or 4 that you wanted to do with your congregation, to teach them to do 3 or 4 with their families. So I think of my books like recipe books. You're not meant to do every single thing. You're meant to use it as a guide and to really pick something that you can do well and that you can dig into deeply. It will overwhelm families, I think. I try to say in the introduction, in case they come to this book without a guide like you, but I write these books with the idea that faith leaders will be guiding the families through them. And so it's really important that you, if you're giving families copies, that you really emphasize this is not, pick a couple of these, or if you have a small enough church that you can put a Post-it note on a couple of them and say, these are the ones for you, the less is more. And in a way, the more you focus, the more richness the families will get out of these ideas and resources. So it cuts through the noise. When you study habits, research around habits, it's the repetition that is so meaningful, not the quantity or the, all of the art supplies that we need. So the 3 potential ways to focus this year for Lent, and I'm going to give you a few ideas of each. If you're going to use this book as a guide for your whole programming is what I mean for this. Faith at home. So, and what I mean by that is, I'll get to it a little bit more later, but you would use you would say to your families at the beginning of Lent, this year during Lent, we're going to really talk about faith practice at home. And each week I'm going to give you an idea of how to do that. Another focus that I'm kind of throwing out there for this year is the focus on reimagining the symbols of Lent and Easter. We can talk about that in a minute. And then the 3 pillars of Lent. Of course, the 3 pillars are prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. And in the book, I've called them prayer, acts of service, or prayer, giving, and simplifying. And I'll talk about that in a minute too. Faith at home. If you want to do a faith at home focus, here's some ways that I think you could do that and do it well. First is a take-home box. So I want to talk about these because I've seen them over the past few years get fancier and fancier and more of a big deal. And I love the idea of it, but I think where it falls apart is that they end up being really complicated. So what I've been seeing a lot of, and what people have done even with my resources, is they'll give up the book and then they'll give a bunch of things to go along with the book and then sort of send it home to their families. Like, here you go, here's your do-it-yourself faith at home kit. And I love it. It's a great idea. But what ends up happening, I think, as I've heard back, is that sometimes families, there's just so much in there and it looks great, but there's no guide to get you through it. So when we get to a take-home box, I'm going to give you an alternative way to go through that box. And then teach at church and reinforce at home. So people have been asking how specifically to do that. And it's a hard question for me to answer because I don't know what everybody's specific program is. But say you have a children's moment or a message for young disciples or some point of connection with younger people in your service, it would be a great time to take a practice and teach it, explain it, even give the materials for it, and then send people out to do that practice. I would suggest that if you did that, something like that, you would do the same one for at least 2 weeks, right? Just repeat it, repetition. We think we have to come up with new things every week, and we really don't. And then one long object lesson is another idea for you for this Lent. So a couple of them in the book are rock tumbling, growing things, and a word a day. So, pardon me. We did the rock tumbling in my church last year. If you want to do it, you probably have to get on it right away if you don't have a rock tumbler, but you just tumbling rocks to make them from rough to smooth takes about 6 weeks. And we used this as an object lesson in our church last year. Each week we took pictures of the rocks, watched them become smooth, and it was a great tangible object lesson. Same thing for growing stuff. There's some ideas in here about things that grow quickly that are very forgiving as they grow. So one long object lesson is an option for you. Symbols, reimagining the symbols for Lent. One of the things that I know you know is that I've noticed if you Google clip art for Lent, or if you see the clip art for Lent and the symbols that we use, there's a lot of crowns of thorns, lots of drops of blood, lots of nails, lots of the spear, lots of the details of the violent execution of Jesus in our symbols. And I'm going to talk about this again at the end, but there's a chapter in the book devoted to symbols, and it's chapter 6. And in that chapter, there are 4 symbols of Jesus's life, 4 of his death, and 4 of his resurrection. So for the 6 weeks of Lent, you could do 2 symbols a week and go through them, go through life, death, and resurrection. You could send home these 2 every week. You could make a big display. You could also use these symbols to make alternative resurrection eggs. And I thought I put the website at the bottom. So if you go to my website, tracysmith.com/eggs, then you will get those symbols. There's actually 12 of them. There's only 9 on here, but you'll get those symbols in a vector art form that you can use to make them large, make posters of them, or to make resurrection eggs. So resurrection eggs, if you don't know what those are, they're like little plastic eggs, and as you open up each one, you talk about the symbol. So I designed this chapter specifically with that in mind, because I so don't like the resurrection eggs that are out there, that they just are not age appropriate, in my opinion. You open it up and there's like a tiny nail or a tiny spear or something like that. It just is not appropriate or necessary, I guess. That's kind of a soapbox. Okay, the 3 pillars of Lent. That's chapters 3, 4, and 5. Praying, simplifying, and giving. Prayer is self-explanatory, right? Simplifying is kind of how I reimagined the pillar of fasting. And just briefly on that, the 2 reasons for that. One is from Muslim friends of mine who have shared, even in the Muslim Islamic tradition, when you are fasting, young children are not expected to fast. And then also because I think, restricting food, giving things up can really be, for developing brains, maybe not the way to go. So the way that chapter goes is simplifying. So I'll say things like, instead of doing no screens, try instead going outside. Instead of giving up sugary drinks, try drinking more water. So the idea of adding something instead of taking something away, I've tried to honor the spirit of fasting, which is letting something go and give it this new way. And then giving, just a more simple term for almsgiving, acts of service. So you could do the 3 pillars of Lent. You could spend 2 weeks on each and do 2 weeks on prayer, 2 weeks on simplifying, and 2 weeks on giving. So you'd use just chapters 3, 4, and 5 and only pick 2 from each. Or you could decide right now that you're going to focus on the 3 pillars of Lent for the next 3 years with your congregation, and then do 1 per year for 3 years. I love that approach because it's really what I'm trying to drill down in terms of going narrow and deep. And also I think wouldn't it be great to say right now that you know what you're going to do for the next 3 years of Lent with your families. Okay, so again, this is just the way that I organize the book. If you're not using the book, I still hope that this is helpful. There's chapter 1 is beginning, how to start the season, and that's where you'll find those object lessons for each season. Chapter 2, Pancake Tuesday and Ash Wednesday, some practices. Ash Wednesday's next week, so it's coming right up. And then these are in the box because they're those 3 pillars: praying, simplifying, and giving. Chapter 6 is that chapter on symbols, reimagining them. Chapter 7 has some practices for Holy Week and some prayers. Chapter 8, the Easter Vigil in Easter. Chapter 9, the season of resurrection. So, there's those 50 days between Easter and Pentecost. I tried to give you some practices to use during that time. And then ending the season in chapter 10. Okay, so what if you did want to use do a take-home box? What would you put in it? I'm going to give you some ideas and then tell you how I think you could use them. So there's a new jelly bean prayer, another personal soapbox / pet peeve of mine. I really don't like the jelly bean prayer that's like, red is for the blood of Christ and black is for how dark your heart is. I wrote a new one. It's focused on creation and new life. So you could put a bag of jelly beans with the colors mentioned in that prayer, and then just attach the prayer or attach the page number. And then symbols from chapter 6, you could just print out those symbols, or you could put them in eggs. I also feel like don't buy plastic eggs. Just don't do it. It's bad for the environment. That said, there are probably enough plastic eggs flying around in your congregation if you start collecting them and asking for them to try and get those, or get them at a secondhand store. Same with this one, if you're using plastic eggs, there's a practice in there for Easter egg prayers, which is basically just putting your prayers in Easter eggs and then opening them back up on Easter, page 27. Prism, I love those little prisms that make rainbows. That's one of the practices in there, and you can get a bunch of them for fairly inexpensively on Amazon. That's one of my favorite faith practices of the last 2 years, is just to hang that up in my house and think of God's promise every time I see a rainbow. If you do this take-home box, I would advise that you give them the box with the items in it, and then do very specific follow-up with each of the practices, right? So say, and make sure you have all of the supplies that they need. Those that I picked, there you don't need anything else. But if you pick a different one out of the book, say you pick a paper chain, give them tape to go along with it, not just the strips of paper, right? Think through, do they have absolutely everything they need in the box? And then as you go through it each week, say, hey, remember that box that we have? Say that you're doing it during a children's moment or during your godly playtime. When you go home, we're going to do the jelly bean prayer. I encourage you to do the jelly bean prayer at home with your families. Take a picture of it, come back to us. Try and find ways to make the connection after you send things out to bring them back, because I think that's one of the things that ends up getting missed. Theology of the cross. So this is the main motivating factor for me why I wanted to write a Faithful Families book for Lent and Easter. And it's because how we talk about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, it matters so much. It's affecting children and shaping them for their whole lives. The symbols that we use, went over that. The lines that we say, like, Jesus died for your sins, you're washed in the blood. Sometimes we toss those around during this season, and we haven't given a lot of thought to how children internalize that and understand what it means. I've been doing a number of conversations about this, and they're on my YouTube page. I did one with Daniel Schroyer, who wrote the book Original Blessing, talking about original sin in children, and then another one with Laura Allery, who is a children's author and has done extensive thinking and work on this topic as well. So I wanted to have this book be informed by a theology of the cross and an atonement theology that I felt good about, and that I felt was good for children and good in this regard. So when you say something like Jesus died for your sins with kids, it's really revealing a very complex theology that's not explained in detail. So the prevailing narrative about what Jesus' death on the cross means is substitutionary atonement. And this isn't a theology webinar. I'm not going to get into the weeds on it, but I do not accept substitutionary atonement as the primary means of understanding Jesus' work on the cross. What I want to say about that is that if you do, or if your church does preach and teach substitutionary atonement, and if it is near and dear to you, you don't have to, you certainly don't have to fight me about it, but you don't have to, this is just an alternative. It's a way to think about other symbols, a way to think about Jesus' death on the cross in a way that is more, I think, more open, more true to the early church patriarchs and fathers of the church, mothers too, of course. So if you are trying to open up your mind around substitutionary atonement, you don't have to fight anybody about it. You can just offer gentle alternatives. And I say that to myself because I like to fight people. Learn and read. I would encourage you to learn and read about atonement theology if you think this is something that you want to dig into more with your kids. And then your job is to curate resources. That's also my job. So if you feel, as I do, that there's not a lot of resources that offer a theology of the cross that you feel good about teaching to children that you feel like aligns with your theology, I do that for you. I have a weekly email that goes out every Tuesday, and I always make sure that the resources in that email when it comes to this topic have been thoroughly vetted. But that's your job, right? Whatever your church's theology is, it's your job to find the resources for them. So we're getting to the end, right on time, I think. So a few things about the book, some nitty gritty if you are going to use it. So like I said, if you choose to use the book, you can excerpt up to 5 practices from the book for your congregation, however you want to. So if you want to put them in your newsletter, if you want to photocopy and send them home, if you want to put on your social media, if you do up to 5 practices, that's allowed with by agreement with Chalice Press. And thank you to Chalice Press for being so generous in that. And then Presbyterians, you can get a discount on 5 and 10 book packs, and the link is been running around in the chat. I know that many of you have already done that. You already have your books. You want to do that as soon as possible so that you get them for Lent by the start of Lent. And if you don't get them by Ash Wednesday, it's no big deal, but get going on that if you want to do that. That's all I have to say. I would love to see you on my website at tracismith.com. And if you are interested in signing up for those weekly emails, you can do it either from tracismith.com or from the Substack. And you can unsubscribe at any time. It's just 5 links for faith and family, and love to see you over there. So I guess it's Q&A time.
All right. Thank you so much, Traci, for all of that and walking us through. So we do have a few questions. Everybody can still put questions in the chat. This is our time to make sure that we're digging deeper into the things that you would like to talk about in at-home faith formation. So from Jenny, we have, how do you present Holy Week events to early elementary age children? I appreciate what you wrote in the front of your Lent book and would like to hear more specifics. I struggle annually to be faithful and nonviolent scary. So Jenny asked questions at the beginning, but if there's some more that you can say, Traci, about being faithful and nonviolent.
So yeah, I think I'm glad for this question, because I think sometimes I feel like I am misinterpreted in what I'm saying. So it's not that we need to shield children from the truth of death, even the truth of a violent death. Although I would argue that we don't want to linger on the violent details of the torture of Jesus, right? That's the part that I would argue that we need to be thinking through a little bit more. And so I'll give an example of this. So I have a friend who's in her 60s, and she is a grandma now, but her children, she became a step parent when her children were older. So she wasn't doing the formation. And she said, my grandkids, I have these pearls, and I wanted to tell my grandkids that I got them from my mom, but that my mom died. But I probably shouldn't say that, because that would be that's too much. We shouldn't talk about death. And I actually encourage the opposite. It's not to talk about death is good and healthy. And the death of Jesus, there is a time to talk about. This is the time, right, to talk about the death. So to say, I encourage really simple, factual storytelling. Jesus died. It was very sad, right? That's the part that gets confusing is when it's like children, we all have this intuitive sense that Jesus died in a painful way, and that's sad and hard. But then we, as theologians, we start saying like, no, it's a good thing. Like, it's good. Don't be sad. It's like, wait, no, Jesus died and it was sad. And it's sad when people die, right? And, I would just say there's no need to focus on the number of lashes, the crown of thorns, the spear, the nails, all of that. With elementary age, I just don't think it's necessary. He died. It was very sad. It's died on a cross, put in a tomb, and then was raised from the dead. And then also that God was sad too, that Jesus was killed, right? God didn't kill him. Jesus was killed by human people. And that was very sad. He was murdered, right? I use the word murdered, killed, died, sad, those types of reframing. And it seems obvious when you say it, but when you look at all the resources out there, that's not how you see that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to go to Amy Lynn's question here. I'm working on a weekly Zoom with our K through 5th graders using the book as a starting point. These may or may not include families or just the kids. Any suggestions on ways to fill this 45-minute window each week in Lent?
With kids. Wow. Okay. So 45 minutes, that's an ambitious and long time. So if you're having kids on Zoom for 45 minutes, I would definitely try to think of ways to get them moving around and does it say what age they are in the question?
K through 5.
Oh, K through 5. Definitely got to be moving around, I think. So if, that one, I'm trying to think off the top of my head which practices in there don't require a lot of materials, right? So to do something. And then you might think about, again, with the repetition idea, you might think about, is there something that I want to do each time for these 6 weeks? I know that your office, Stephanie, is doing a Mr. Rogers Day, right? You're hosting.
Well, all of the day focuses on Mr. Rogers Day on March 20th. And we have great new resources for that.
So the thing about him, right, is he has these routines that he always does. He puts on his sweater, he feeds the fish, he does the thing, right? It's these routines. And that's exactly it, right? So maybe just thinking off the top of my head, and it's on my YouTube channel, I have my own kids doing the Lord's Prayer body prayer. It's not in this book, but what if you started with that every week, the Lord's Prayer body prayer, and did that, and then by the end of the 6 weeks, they maybe would get it. So I would maybe plan out like, okay, what are we going to do for these number of times? We'll start with that, then we'll do a practice, then we'll do a sharing time with highs and lows, and then we'll go, and then maybe just shorten it to 30 minutes. Just make it shorter. If it's with the kids, that's my suggestion.
There was a suggestion in the chat too about having the children run and find something that shows they are lucky.
Oh, so, I've always fun. Oh my gosh, show and tells on Zoom too. I mean, during the shutdown time, my grown-ups were doing that. They were like, there was some times when they would just be like going around their house and showing us stuff. So yeah, that's a great idea. Zoom games too. Yeah, there's not a lot of that in here, but you can find them.
So Sarah is offering hands-on Lent the first 3 Tuesdays during Lent. She isn't able to do it for the full 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And the participants will have your book. What 3 activities would you recommend as a must-do while we're together?
I mean, that's like asking me to pick my favorite child, right? 3 must-dos while you're together. I don't know. I can't answer that. I would say if you're going to do 3, why don't you pick 1 prayer, 1 simplifying, and 1 giving, or do 3 prayers, focus on one of the pillars 3 times, or do 1 from each. I refuse to pick.
Yeah, I like that idea of maybe doing something from each of the three pillars.
So there's three pillars, right? And then one of the reasons I'm so loath to pick for other people is that I don't know your people. I don't know your style. I don't know what kind of a leader you are, right? I want you to find the ones that you want to do, that you think like, yeah, so-and-so in my church will get behind that. And even extra credit, right? If you can get with that kid and parent ahead of time, teach it to them, and then have them teach it on the Zoom to their peers, even better, right?
Okay, so Dana's asking, I understand the reason of not giving the torture details, but I'm wondering, as we are learning how to be more inclusive of others who have lived differently than me, some of the children, some of the children do experience torture and awful deaths. How does this all fit? Any thoughts about that?
So I guess the question, if I'm understanding it correctly, is like there are children that have experienced and seen death and torture and death in their own lives. Like how do you open up a discussion about that? So I think that to give space for that, right? To talk about death, and death is sad, and then let the children talk out of their own experience, right? So if you have a child that's seen someone shot, right, and they need to talk about that, then of course open up the space for that. We're not trying to say that's kind of exactly my point, right? We're not trying to say that people don't have these experiences or that we're trying to gloss over them. We're trying to treat them with the reverence that they deserve. I don't have an expertise in children that have been through that kind of trauma, but I would definitely, if I did, in my own congregation, I would be seeking out some assistance from bereavement counselors and those that are especially trained in specific trauma and bereavement.
Yeah, and leaving space. I like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Carlton would like to know how you talk about resurrection with kids.
Well, so this is tricky sometimes too. And the reason that the trickiest part, I think, about resurrection is if we talk about, is grandma going to come back from the grave, right? No, she's not, right? So that's the hard part about talking about resurrection, right? But resurrection is a miracle, and it's a new life, and that's what is the truth of our faith, right? So I like to talk about resurrection again through symbols and what it means. And then when it comes to talking about grandma, I do believe in talking with kids about the miracle of resurrection in the ways in which we remember people. So grandma's body will not be coming back to life. And I don't leave any room for that. I don't say maybe it's a miracle. You never know. Like, no, grandma's body will not be coming back to life. But one of the truths of resurrection is that grandma lives on in us when we remember her, when we have a dream about her, when we see her in our dreams. So I think that's an important loop to close with kids when we're talking about resurrection, is because it's on their minds, right? I've heard so many stories about kids who had that hope of resurrection for loved ones. And yeah, makes me cry to think about it. But so there's lots of ideas in here too about symbols that you can use and other imagery for resurrection too.
Great, thanks. One of our attendees asked if you were able to share your slides. I wasn't quite sure, we hadn't talked about that.
Sure, I'll email them to you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. There will be an email going out to everyone registered for this webinar with some details, and maybe, I'm not sure if we can add the slides to that, but we'll figure out a way to post the slides. And also asking about, is this just for children? We are focusing on households that have younger children for this webinar, and for this, this book is focused there. But what do you think about households that don't have smaller children and the practice?
I definitely don't think that they're just for kids at all. I mean, that's one of the things that I have started to wonder about with my whole series of books actually is that it's called Faithful Families. And so, to rethink about it in terms of families of faith. But no, I do not. In fact, that's a really good word. I think sometimes people can feel excluded. And then also to remind people that when we're talking about families, when it's me and my houseplants, we're a family, right? Me and I have a family, even if they're not living in my house with me, right? So to be as inclusive as you can about families is wonderful, and to allow the space for people that don't have children in their homes to do some of these simple practices is really freeing and wonderful, and to practice them together. So if you're doing a body prayer in your sanctuary, everybody does it, right? Everybody does it right alongside the kids. So if you're doing any kind of take-home kit, I strongly encourage you to give it to everybody. The jelly bean prayer for 2 senior adults that are living at home, or 1 woman in her 90s. Why can't she have a jelly bean prayer? Yes, she can, right? So absolutely, I think open it as wide as possible for all of the practices. And then if you're doing an adult Bible study, you might offer some more depth into the conversation. You might, teenagers as well. I think my books do skew more younger with some of the simple language, but I believe they can be used for everybody.
Yeah. And sort of a follow up to that, in talking about Bible study with couples and a joint Bible study, do you have any suggestions or tips about what that might look like?
I'm doing a Bible study with intergenerationally?
With your significant other or your spouse.
Oh, that's not really kind of my world. I don't know. I do not.
I think that when we talk about practices, we can think about where those came from the Bible too. And I think maybe when we talk about the practices here in just a moment, there's some biblical connections that folks might be able to make for those Bible studies too.
Sure. I mean, you could always do any practice with your sweetheart. I'm just laughing because my family is so busy right now. My husband and I would not be like, let's have some joint prayer time. We should.
Right. Right. But that's where these practices come in, right? Mm-hmm. So let's see if I don't know if I missed anybody here. Let me make sure.
I see a question about doing the lessons outdoors, and I would say, yeah, depending on your weather restrictions or whatever. There's so much in here about gardening and plants, and Easter is do it. There's a sunrise breakfast idea in here, I think, that you do outside. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're mailing books to families, how might you explain to them in a cover letter or note included what we want them to do with the books at home? In other words, what is the main point that you would give to families as instruction?
I would say what I said about it being, this is a guidebook to the season, and our hope is that you would pick 1 or 2 things to do out of this book, or even better, if you can suggest a few, and even better than that, if you can suggest a few and say that we're going to do them in our church, right? So here's a book, and I would like to draw your attention to page blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. These are 3 practices. I mean, the easier you can make it. If you have a small number of families, if you can say, I've put a Post-it note on those pages for you. I've circled it. I've circled a prayer. I've written your child's name in it. I think we have a dedication page on the front. Nope, never mind. That's not this book. But there's space. You could write a note in the front. It just depends on how much time and how many kids you have. So I would keep it simple and focus on 3 max that you want them to look at.
Great. Well, I think that leads us into our practice videos that we promised you all here today. So a little bit of background on the Faith Practices Project from the Office of Christian Formation. Over the past few years, we have gone through a process of gathering practitioners and educators and professors and pastors and talking about practices and talking about them in such a way that we're building a communal a communal faith. The community is really important in our Reformed faith, and our faith is formed a lot by our community. So we wanted to simplify, Traci, and really talk about 5 practices that we think, really support a communal faith. So we came up with prayer, hospitality, storytelling, retreat, and service are the 5 practices that we decided to focus on. So there's a faith practices toolkit on each of these practices. There's the essentials, the biblical references. So there's a way that you can do Bible study around them. And then there are ministry kits that are available for each of them as well. So in sort of, enhancing that project, we really wanted to see some videos start happening. So the first thing that we've done here is ask Traci to do short videos on our 5 practices, plus a video on Holy Week. So we have 6 videos for you all. And these are videos that they're less than 5 minutes. And they're meant to, you'll give them directly to the households that you would like. They're free, of course, and they're on YouTube, so that you can perhaps suggest that they can explore one of these a week. You can do it during Lent, but the 5 practices that we had Traci do are evergreen. They're in general. So we're excited to give you the link to those today, and wanted to talk a little bit about them. And Traci wanted to know just how you engaged with these 5 practices, and what you thought as you're recording your videos for us.
Yeah, I love, first of all, I love this focus that we have as a denomination, focus on practice. Obviously, it's perfect. It's great. So I hope that everybody digs into the resources that are on the Office of Christian Formation website, looks into them, looks at what has been written. There are a lot of things and a lot of free things that you can use. And I hope that you'll be good curators of them, right? Just like with my stuff, pick what resonates with you and then use it with your congregation. And so I tried to pick some of the practices that I tried to lean into practices that didn't require a lot of stuff, artsy crafts type of things that you could do. There's a couple that require some minimal supplies, but I just picked out of my different books, practices that I thought went with each of the themes. And like Stephanie says, you could use it during Lent. I would say not to, because Lent has its own theme. These are maybe for ordinary time. And I think it's the gift that you can use the Holy Week, obviously Holy Week during Holy Week, but the other 5, it could be a great gift to yourself to just have 5 weeks after Easter planned right out, or, in the summertime, pick 5 weeks and go through and then, build something around those. And as Stephanie said, send them out to your families once a week. And again, follow up with them. I'm going to send you a video and then try to watch it. And then, or do it for 10 weeks. Here's the video. Did you see the video last week? If you didn't see it this week, or show it in worship, repetition is key, and saying things over and over again. Maybe you want to do it every summer for a few years. I don't know, but repetition. That's what you'll need.
Yeah, and I think, and we chose these 5 practices and wanted to think about them in a way that storytelling. How do we encourage and equip our young children to participate in the practice of storytelling? And how do we do that with somebody who's 103, right? It's a lifelong process of how to engage in the practice of storytelling. But it's not just something you start at a particular age. So right. I think that was one of the main messages that we want to send home, is that these practices are for a lifetime. And what does it look like if you're engaging in storytelling at home? And then how do you bring that into the congregation as well? So
I love it so much.
Yeah. Traci, do you have any specific ideas about how you might use these videos if you were to use them in your congregation?
So many ideas. Part of it depends on what your technical ability is in your church, right? So I think one of the best ways to use it is to use it while you have people there and show it. If you show it in worship as a part of the service? If so, go ahead and do that, or after service in the coffee time, have people just gather. Like Stephanie said, I think the longest one is like 4 minutes, so they're not very long. The second best, would be to link it somehow to your do you want them, I should have asked you this, can they drop it into their own, like if they have an
I should clarify. So they've all been given the link, and it's just an open public YouTube page. So however you want to embed them or use them, they are free to use for all.
So on Facebook, right? On Facebook, I think the Facebook would be a great way, or through Instagram, whatever social media the kids are using these days. I don't know. I just sound like an old lady, but all of the above, right? If we're really trying, it's like the joke that we have as pastors, people, like this t-shirt that pastors want to get that says it was in the bulletin, right? Like how many times do people say like, I didn't know about that? And you're like, are you kidding? Right? So if you want these to get watched or used, you're probably going to want to put them in the newsletter, in the bulletin, and the screen, on the t-shirt, and then do it over and over and over again until people get it. And then just whatever suggestions I have in there, and I am not remembering which ones I chose, but I'm sure I know one of them I chose was gratitude, because that's a huge one in my family, to write down what you're thankful for. If you see that one in the video, then talk through it with your congregation. Do you want to do this? Let's all do it together. Let's all pick one of these, right? So again, more is not better. There's 5 videos and there's probably 3 practices in each video. That's 15 practices. Try to pray about one that you want to take root in your families and your church, right? One at a time. And to emphasize that is, I think, the way to sort of splay all of these things out. Then it's like the seeds that are scattered shallow, there's a shallowness to it. So pick what you like and then repeat.
Absolutely, for sure. So yeah, Miata has put the link once again down there in chat. We will provide the link along with the recording of this webinar in an email to everyone as well. But notice that there'll probably be a little delay on that because we'll need to wait until the recording is ready. So grab it if you can. If you want to use it as soon as possible, try to grab that link now and save it there. And again, these are meant to be shared. There is no copyright on it. This is your denominational. This is your giving at work.
Yes.
This is how you
your denomination speaking.
This is your denomination offering your free resources for you to use. So do we have in these sort of last minutes, we want to do about an hour on this webinar, I think. So are there any questions? Let's see. Cindy asks, how would they work for a VBS? One each day to send home. Ooh, a practices VBS. What do we think about that?
I love that. Somebody should write the curriculum, not me, not it. Yeah, that would be great. You could show it in your VBS at the beginning and then send it home. Or here's an idea. What if you had VBS like a parent's time, like a parent either at the beginning or the end, encourage parents to come for 15 minutes, have a cup of coffee and watch the video and talk about faith practices at home. I think that would be great.
Yeah. Stephanie says, along with the summer sermon series. So that would be
sure.
Well, yeah.
That's the thing. There's never a problem with faith formation leaders coming up with ideas, right? Like, in fact, I feel like that's part of our problem, is that there are so many ideas. You are such endlessly creative people, and it's focusing them and choosing which ones to use, right? Not coming up with enough. Yeah. Exactly. Ideas are endless. It's getting the families to play along. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's the hard work of it, right? Is being that cheerleader. did a talk on the role of the faith formation leader for the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, and it's available. If you Google my name and Yale Youth Ministry Institute, you'll probably be able to find it on there. And I would really encourage you to watch that talk, because I talk a lot about what your role is as faith formation leaders in terms of getting this rooted into your families at home, like how to be a coach. And I use a bunch of images there. So if you want to dig into that more, that's where you should go, I think.
Yeah. And I think I'll say a little bit more about, getting families to play along. I heard something very transformational in one of my last conferences, one of the Zoom conferences. I think it was the Intergenerate conference. And the speaker said, we're trying to skill build. So we go through this period of time where we're throwing resources at families, throwing resources, and they're overwhelmed, and they just don't, that's not what they have time for. But what we're actually trying to do is build some skills. And so that's the way I think we can look at practices, is skill building.
Yeah.
So it's not like, let's sit down now and have our time to talk about God, everybody now, right? Yeah. Building the skills of how to incorporate storytelling or hospitality into your everyday all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We say is be intentional about naming it. So if you see that the practice of hospitality is being practiced in a home, then you're saying, this is the sacred practice of hospitality. So you're naming that practice as you see it happening, so that we, learn that faith language. Yes, Leslie. So, and incorporating it. And I think those are the skills that we would like our households to learn, and takes repetition and simplicity and a lot of time.
Yes. I mean, I think of it in terms of habits too, right? Their faith habits and routines, right? So their routines, their habits. So I've started to learn a lot about how habits are formed, how they take root. One of my dreams is to do research around these faith practices to try and find out what takes root and what it takes to make them take root. But we know from research around habits, right, the best way to start a new habit is to tack it onto a habit that you already have. So if you have a habit of washing your hands, maybe saying a prayer while you wash your hands. You have a habit of eating dinner, tacking something on when you are eating your dinner, right? Just train the families to think about it in that way. And then another long yammery soapbox we could go on is about how to train and teach families to have grace with themselves, because it's like, what's the standard here? What are we trying to do? And to show them, like, what I'm, putting before you is something that will take 30 seconds. And some days it just won't happen. And I love to tell stories about faith practices gone awry, right? Showing them, like, this was terrible. We tried it, and my kids were talking about poop the whole time, right? To have a place for them to share those stories, because we forget that as leaders, they think maybe it's not a safe space. Like, they think of us as holy, and we are spiritual leaders, but then it sets up a standard where they feel like it doesn't work for my house. It doesn't work for me. It might work for the pastor's family. And we all know, all of us that are pastors are like, it's not working any better for my family either, right? So to go first and to share that is a gift, I think.
Yeah. Love that. Sharing the practice of what has gone awry. That's
what has gone. I have a whole talk about that when I talk to parents. I have a whole section about that.
Yeah. For fun when they talk about poop in the children's sermons. That's a whole nother soapbox about why children's sermons are problematic. Okay, well, I think that we've engaged in a lot of great things today, and I hope that you all have gotten something from what we've presented, and hope that you've grabbed those videos. We'll be sharing those, and if you haven't gotten your books yet, you'll want to take advantage of that. I should also say thank you to Chalice Press for working with us to offer this. So it is the Office of Christian Formation's goal to continue this focus on at-home faith practices and at-home faith formation. And we welcome anything that you would like to suggest for our next topics or our next resource that we're trying to resource your families with. So Miata, my wonderful, wonderful colleague, is reading my mind, and she's putting in the landing page for our website and also our faith practices toolkit. So make sure that you follow us there and watch for any future things. Traci, I think, has shared her website, and we've shared a few of those as well. So, you know what, Traci, what we didn't do at the very beginning is talk about, you still have that little prayer handy that you were going to say at the beginning?
We can end it. We can end with prayer.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll join Traci in a prayer.
Hang on. Oh, I don't have this one. I'll just use one from this book, which is the Prayers for Faithful Families book. So this one is God's love. So prayer on God's love. God's love is all around us. God's love is a hug. God's love is beauty. God's love is warmth. God's love is family. So as you guys go out into the world, you can tell I'm in the Midwest now, I say you guys, as y'all go out into the world to do these things, may you go with God's love. May God's love radiate through you and through the families that you serve, not only today, this day, but all your days as well. Thanks be to God.
Amen. Thank you all.